Thank you very much for taking time out of the rehearsals, which are going on next door.
That's right.
How's it going?
I shouldn't say it, but it's going extremely well.
Why? Because that's sort of like...
We never say
No.
The most we ever say is that we're quietly confident.
Quietly confident, very
But
nice.
everybody's having a very, very good time.
Yeah.
And is working very hard.
Okay. So what is rehearsing next door is a play called Kenny Morgan. Who is Kenny Morgan?
Kenny Morgan was an actor, a film actor and stage actor. And in 1940, the BFI voted him the most promising newcomer. And 9 years later, he committed suicide. He was one of Terence Rattigan's lovers. And it was, I think, the relationship with Rattigan and other people that sort of caused the problems, because Rattigan was of necessity in those days terribly closeted and kept Kenny apart from the public gaze. And I think eventually Kenny got tired of this. So he committed suicide, and that was my starting point. Suicide was very common. After the war, there was a lot of depression about. I think in the 40s, the deaths from suicide by gas was something like 2,700.
Really?
And there were lots of failed suicides. In Rattigan's play, The Meter Runs Out. That was quite a common occurrence. If you were caught having failed to commit suicide, you were then taken to court and prosecuted, put in prison, because attempted suicide was a criminal offence. So they didn't have it easy.
Terrible state of affairs.
All those sort of tensions that are in the deep blue sea at the time, because people would be aware of, I've tried to recreate in my different approach to the same facts.
Yeah.
So there are points in my play where I've deliberately sort of produced a little 3 or 4 points where I've produced a little homage
to Mr. Rattigan.
to Mr. Rattigan to say thank you to.
For all those fans.
For those fans, they will recognise 3 or 4 occasions where the dialogue is quite similar, but the characters are completely different.
Yeah.
Because I did research very carefully the real people involved in the suicide of Kenny Morgan, some of whose names I've had to change.
Sure. Now, when you say research, it occurs to me that a lot of your successes have been adaptations.
Yes.
Is your, and of course recently was Wolf Hall and Bring Up the Bodies and all of that.
Yes.
But even it fascinates me when I'm thinking of things like the Chekhov and the Ibsens that you've translated. Is this a love of the classics or a love of interpretation?
It's. I'm very careful about who I work with.
Well, I was going to say, do you form a relationship with Ibsen?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
Ibsen, Schiller, Chekhov, and I'm very fortunate in Chekhov, for instance. In order to translate the spirit of a Chekhov play, you've got to get to know the man.
Yes.
And you've got to read everything. Actors say to me, what research do I do if we're doing Uncle Barney? So read all the stories.
Yeah.
Get to know the man. Anybody can translate line by line. You end up with a very literary adaptation that nobody wants to listen to. So what you go for is the spirit of the piece. And of course, there's then the problem of condensing everything, in that a Schiller play on average is about 7 hours. Even in Schiller's lifetime, they were never performed in their entirety. He did his own adaptations of his own work to produce something that you could present on a stage. So heavy cutting, translate the spirit, but there is a reason why these classic plays, the Ibsens, the Strindbergs, the Schillers, have survived, and it's because they're about truth. And all plays are about truth.
You've had a couple of very, very successful, high-profile years, where you've been lauded for your adaptation of Bring Up the Bodies and Wolf Hall.
Yeah.
Now, you were nominated for Tony for that. I'm wondering, did you go to the Tonys?
I can't remember. No, I didn't.
You must remember.
No, I didn't. I was there for the opening, but I've moved on. I was on to the next.
Okay, I was going to say, what's it like for Michael Poulton being invited to something like the Tonys? Is this something you ever thought you would do?
I've been to the Tonys 3 times,
right.
and it's frightening.
Right.
They stick a. I narrowly for the Fortune's Fool, the play I did with Alan Bates and Frank Langella.
Mm-hmm.
I was told I missed that by a small number of votes, and I lost out to Edward Albee, the goat. But what happens is you're sitting in the corner of an aisle and they put a camera in your face.
Thanks a lot.
And you can see yourself on the screen. And of course you've got to react like, oh yes, well, it's Edward Albee's one, I've lost. I couldn't go to the Tonys for Wolf Hall. And I think there were 8 nominations.
Incredible.
But
did you know when you were working on that this tale about Henry VIII and all the goings on around him would be such a success? Because it's understandable the success here, but it doesn't necessarily follow Broadway, does it?
Well, it was much more. It was a huge success at Stratford, and in the Aldwych. It was one of the biggest successes we've had in the West End. They liked it in America, but the audiences didn't come. They were respectful, put it that way, and they did nominate. There were 8 Tony nominations, but I loved the process of working on it with Hilary because she was incredibly generous.
I was going to ask you. All of a sudden, you're working with a living writer.
Yes, well, that was the joke. She always we used to do platforms together. And she always used to say, I know that Mike would far prefer it if I were dead, but I don't intend to be for a long time. And we developed this sort of banter, but she was absolutely great. And she said to the cast on the first day of rehearsals, she said, tear up the books. These are new things, they are plays.
Wow.
And I always said, you can't put a novel on its feet, you've got to find the play in it.
Yes.
But I couldn't, Hilary was just so generous and accepting of some of my wilder flights.
I think sometimes that's the downfall of some adaptations when they come from another medium, is that people sometimes, I feel, don't understand it is a different thing,
No, you're absolutely right. But the way that I said to Hilary at the beginning was I said, you've got to brace yourself because we're going to lose all our favourite bits, because it's like taking a Rolls Royce to pieces and trying to reassemble them as a helicopter. She was straight on.
I love that analogy.
But during the course of the work on the 2 play, well, it was going to be 1 play. Matt Banshaw said, is it possible to adapt Wolf Hall? And I said, well, I read it again, I read it and enjoyed it. And I said, if you get the right person to adapt it. And he said, might you be the right person? I said, no, I'm too busy. I'm going to have a year off and write a novel. And he worked at me until I said yes. And I said, if I get on with Hilary, I'll do it. So I met Hilary and we got on like a house on fire. And the rest is history.
The rest is history. Now fast forward. Kenny Morgan, the new play, is actually rehearsing behind us. That's what's all the banging and clanging going on. It's a rather noisy play.
I don't remember it. I'm slightly worried.
I have to go in there and rewrite that bit. I'm wondering if that's sort of success, because it's a long trajectory from having those experiences writing the plays and then seeing it all the way through and Tony Awards and everything. Does that make it more pressurized in this environment? Do you feel more pressure having had all of that success, or do you just put it down to another?
No. There's no. I'm being serious now.
Yeah.
there is no pressure in success because you're as good as the last thing. No, you really are. You're as good as the last thing you did.
So you can't be complacent.
No, and what matters, by the time you've got a success, by the time Wolf Hall was a huge success, by the time it went to America, I was on something else.
Yes.
And so you never really have the leisure to sort of get big-headed and sort of enjoy just being successful because you're always on something else. The great thing about this is it's a long time. I mean, I write big plays. I tend to write epics, you know, RSC, Canterbury Tales, Mort, Dartha. A lot with Greg Doran. Greg Doran and I sort of have worked together 5 times. And then we did this huge production in Japan. That's the first time I'd written a play. It was 2/3 in Japanese, and that was a big success. But now, the difference and the joy is working on a very small scale in a studio with a much smaller audience actually in the room. And I got the taste for it with Lucy Bailey, who was directing this. And we did an Uncle Vanya in her print room with Ian Glenn. And I just got the bug for working in a
up close and personal.
Yeah, up close and personal with a group of really, really good actors. And the audience, I'm sure it's going to be the same thing here, but in the print room, suddenly you're sort of in the room with Uncle Vanya, rowing with David Yellen, the professor, and you're there, and it's what I'm after in this. I want you to be in the room when you come into the theatre. I want you to be in the room with that body lying on the floor. And I want you to come into the room with Mrs. Simpson and David Lloyd and actually discover what's going on. It's a bit of a mystery. It's a bit of a thriller almost. It's certainly a detective story. There's a lot of them.
I think you're a very lucky man to be. I think it must be a nice thing to be a writer.
Oh, it is.
And I wonder, in finishing, what's the nicest thing for you being a writer?
Not being a publisher. I was a publisher for most of my life, and I gave it up a long time ago. I retired.
It was a good thing.
And then I started writing in 1996. And the best thing about it is the sort of twofold nature. It's a very solitary experience. And I shut myself away on my own in Norfolk, because the family are all grown up. And I work on my own sort of day and night and don't see anybody for weeks on end. And then suddenly, you're working with a group of people that are all your friends. I mean, in this case, you know, there are 7 actors. Or when you're at the RSC, it's more like 25. But you suddenly go from being completely solitary to being on holiday in a big organisation. So that contrast is a joy, really.
Well, good luck with Kenny Morgan. We're looking forward to seeing it, and I hope it's a tremendous success.
That's very kind. Thank you very much. I've enjoyed it.